Today I want to tell you about a violent coup and massacre that happened in Wilmington, North Carolina in 1898. It's a little known incident, but one that reveals a lot about American history. North Carolina in 1898 was in the middle of Reconstruction after the Civil War. Formerly enslaved people and their descendants were growing a middle class as well as a political class. Black people in North Carolina were actually voting, holding office, opening businesses, and building generational wealth. This was true other places in the country as well. It wasn't unique to North Carolina. But Wilmington was emerging as a center of Black success in that area. Most Black people at the time voted Republican, and most Black people who were elected to public office were Republican. Just as a quick reminder, political parties were different back then. I'm way oversimplifying here, but essentially in 1898, the Republicans were the party of the Northern liberal elite, the party of Lincoln and the Triumphant Union. The Democrats were the ruling class of the South. However, there was also an upstart third party at the time, the Populists, also sometimes known as the People's Party. This was a party whose main base was white farmers in the West, a region of the country that was most recently colonized and whose political character hadn't yet been fully captured by either Northern Republicans or Southern Democrats. The Populists ran on a platform of economic disillusionment, a sense of betrayal by the establishment of both the North and the South that was letting railroad companies, land speculators, and robber baron industrialists run roughshod over common people everywhere in the country. Although the Populists had their main base out west, they soon began to make inroads with poor and working class people in the agricultural South and industrial North as well. Not only that, but they began to build a coalition with Black Republicans in southern states to form what was called the Fusionist Movement, an attempt to defeat the Southern Democrat establishment by joining forces between poor whites energized by the Populist Party and recently enfranchised Blacks energized by the Republican Party. And guess what? The Fusionists started to succeed. In North Carolina, Fusionists won every single statewide office, including the governorship, between 1894 and 1896. Wilmington was no exception, where Fusionists swept to victory in local elections and ousted Southern Democrats from control. This provoked white supremacist fury. Southern Democrats began to issue direct threats about the upcoming 1898 elections. For example, Democratic Party leader Daniel Schenck stated, "It will be the meanest, vilest, dirtiest campaign since 1876. The slogan of the Democratic Party, from the mountains to the sea, will be but one word." And it was a racial slur. Prominent Democrat Alfred Waddell railed against black male suffrage and the race traitors who enabled it, stating, "We will never surrender to a ragged raffle of Negroes, even if we have to choke the Cape Fear River with carcasses." The sentiment was echoed by prominent white members of the community, both men and women, including Rebecca Cameron, who opined in an open letter, "Our old historic river should be choked with the bodies of our enemies, white and black." Former Confederate officer William A. Guthrie declared in a speech at a white supremacist rally, "The Anglo-Saxon planted civilization on this continent, and wherever this race has been in conflict with another race, it has asserted its supremacy and either conquered or exterminated the foe. This great race has carried the Bible in one hand and the sword in the other. Resist our march of progress and civilization, and we will wipe you off the face of the earth." White populists in the Fusionist movement attempted to fight back with their own publications and speeches and rallies. Consider the following speech from white Fusionist leader Oliver Dockery. "You may abuse me if you like, but I want to tell you that you will never make me duck. Can there be a more diabolical scheme than this latest plan of monopoly? What think ye, laborers? Are you ready to march into the trap? Are you ready to surrender your liberties? Can the hypocrite leaders be anything except tools or fools? And in 100 other ways they will tempt you to fall down and worship them. The Democrats in Tar Heeldom are straining their lungs and using all the big type in the printing of farce to prove that Negro domination is what is the matter with North Carolina. But it won't work, not altogether. Wherein is Negro domination responsible for the Democratic judges who have sat on the bench in recent years in a state of beastly intoxication and sentenced innocent men to the penitentiary and allowed rogues and murderers to go free? Wherein was Negro domination responsible for the lease to the Southern Railway of the North Carolina property which has been denounced as a midnight crime? Wherein is Negro domination responsible for the existence of one of the greatest trusts of the century which has impoverished the entire state? Who has been responsible for the shameless record of theft and plunder at the state's capital when the legislature was solidly Democratic? It was because of the infamous proceedings of democratic misrule and pillage that the Populist Party was born. From the ranks of democracy came every mother's son of the many thousands of populists who are righteous in wrath against conspirators masquerading as untrammeled democracy. That is the truth of the whole sorry business. And whenever the Democratic Party will purge itself, when it will shake off the bloodsuckers and leeches who have disfigured and disgraced it, there are thousands who will return to its folds. Until that glad day comes, the Democrats must do something else besides cry Negro domination. However, such protests were of no avail. On November 8th, the day of the election in Wilmington, white supremacist mobs, armed to the teeth, blocked every road leading in and out of the city and turned away would-be voters with gunfire. The fusionist governor of North Carolina came down personally to try to help calm the tensions, but a mob swarmed his train car and tried to kidnap and lynch him, and he barely escaped. The white supremacist mob declared Democrat victory for the few candidates that had been up for election, but the majority of the local government remained fusionist because the mayor and most of the city council hadn't actually been up for re-election. Newspapers at the time called the results fraud due to widespread voter repression. On November 9th, a group of prominent white Democrats called for a mass meeting at the Wilmington courthouse, where 457 white men eventually signed what they called the White Declaration of Independence, which was essentially a laundry list of white supremacist demands and a guidebook to enforcing their vision of racial hierarchy. They gave the city 12 hours to comply with their demands, which included the expulsion of certain individuals they held responsible for violating racial taboos, as well as black people handing over their jobs and businesses to whites. The group's demands were not met, and on the morning of November 10th, 1898, a mob of around 2,000 white supremacists orchestrated a violent coup of the elected fusionist government, forcing the elected officials out at gunpoint and installing their own Democrat mayor and entirely Democrat city council. They then proceeded to rampage through the town, destroying black businesses and homes and massacring local residents. The death toll was never confirmed, but is estimated to be as high as 300 people murdered. In the wake of the massacre, residents appealed to President William McKinley to send federal help and received no response. Thousands of residents fled the town. The massacre emboldened voter suppression efforts across the state, and by 1899, the Democrats had retaken control of the entire state government in North Carolina. They immediately set to work passing legislation that we now understand as Jim Crow laws, codifying segregation and white supremacist dominance in nearly every aspect of public and private life. The rest of the South followed suit. The fusionist movement never recovered anywhere in the country.